Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Kirk Talk. Now, last episode I talked a little bit about one of my favorite series, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. And I talked about how Joseph Joestar was my personal favorite main character. He was my favorite Jojo up to this point. Like I said, I've only watched up to part 4 and I have not read any further, so I really don't know anything to make an informed decision about any of the other characters. So after talking about my favorite hero, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about my favorite JoJo's villain. Now, within any great story, there are 3 roles. There is the hero, there is the villain, and there is the fool. JoJo's, while having fantastic heroes, is also known for having its incredible villains. Now, I won't say that I'm particularly fond of the character Dio Brando, especially in his Phantom Blood iteration. You know, he's the kind of guy who burns dogs and steals your girl and punches you in the face. So he's kind of a jerk. But that being said, what makes Dio an especially good villain is how much you hate him. Within the first episode of the show, or within the first chapters of the story, we see that of what a horrible person Dio is. We see how he's cruel to others, and his goal is to make Jonathan's life a living hell for no other reason than Jonathan is rich and Dio grew up poor. And that motivation is kind of weird to me. Like, it doesn't make sense, but it makes me hate the character. And if I hate the villain, that means I'm going to root for the hero. Now, Dio is, from part 1, is certainly not my favorite villain. I just wanted to briefly touch upon him because he was the first villain that we were introduced to. Now, the part 2 villains I think are exceptionally better. They are the Pillar Men, Cars, Wamu, and AC/DC. And I guess you can count Santana, but he's kind of there for like 2 seconds, right? And they're excellent villains. I like their design. I like how they have like the elemental powers, and they're excellent foils to Joseph Joestar. But that being said, they're still not my favorite. Now, when we get to part 3, Stardust Crusaders, we see a lot of villains. See, up to that point, the first 2 parts of JoJo's really had only 2 or 3 villains, right? You know, there was Dio and his underlings, and then there was the Pillar Men. And that was pretty much it. And that's all we had, except for a couple small guys here and there. Now, Stardust Crusaders started doing this like stand user of the week kind of deal, where each episode or each couple chapters, the Stardust Crusaders would fight another stand user, you know, that psychic energy, the punching ghost, what have you. And there's a lot to go through, and there is a lot to like. Now, that being said, before I start touching upon my favorite villains from Stardust Crusaders, I will say that I'm a much bigger fan of Dio in part 3 than I am in part 1, mainly because part 1 was the catalyst that built him up to be what he was in part 3. And plus, I really love his ability of the world. I also love his costume design. I like the yellow. And I just think that the whole like time stop thing is ridiculous. And if I ever did like a really good cosplay, I'd want to do a really good part 3 Dio, not part 1 Dio. So I really do like the main villain, which is Dio, but we only see him for a couple of episodes. You know, we really don't see him all the way through. Now, my personal favorite villain from Stardust Crusaders, get this, none other than the man, the myth, the legend himself, Whole Horse. I love the guy. I think as a villain, he's very entertaining. He kind of reminds me of an earlier Disney villain, maybe like, you know, kind of like Prince John from Robin Hood, just as an example. A bit of a funnier kind of villain, but still somehow menacing. See, what's cool about Whole Horse is that we actually see him in multiple parts of Stardust Crusaders. We see him with the initial fight with him in Centerfold. Then we see him again when they fight in Yaba and her stand Justice, which was the big smoke cloud, right? And then Whole Horse kind of fights, but not really. And then we see him later on that he's going to shoot Dio in the head, but then he loses his guts. And then we finally see him with the Oingo Boingo brothers as Whole Horse gets defeated. Now, the reason why I like him so much is I like his design. You know, I'm really big on like the whole like Western cowboy thing. So I think making a cowboy villain was kind of cool. And I am in love with the Emperor. That's his stand. Now the Emperor, if you don't know, it's a gun stand, and it's the first time we see a gun stand. And what's really cool about it is that it has unlimited ammo, and a whole horse can actually control where the bullets go because they're actually part of the stand. Now, normally, if one of the Star Wars Crusaders had this stand, the Emperor, they'd be overpowered. But Whole Horse's character flaws of not having confidence in himself and not believing in his abilities really hinders him, and it makes him fail multiple times when he's fighting the Star Wars Crusaders. Because realistically, like, he shot Abdul in the head and could have killed him. He could have killed all the Star Wars Crusaders because, like I said, dude had a gun. You know, Polnareff might have had a knight, but Whole Horse had a gun, which he could control the bullets and where they went, right? Now, we, of course, don't know the true extent of Whole Horse's power because he's only in a couple episodes, and he's not entirely fleshed out. But we see enough of him where, me personally, I'm like, yeah, I like that guy. So Whole Horse is my favorite villain besides Dio from Part 3. Now, we get to the good stuff. The most recent season, Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. Now, there are a lot of really cool villains in Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. We've got the Nijimura brothers, of course, Okuyasu becoming a hero later on. Then we have Highway Star, which has the whole, like, feet monster thing. We had Enigma, which was an excellent arc. Then we also have the Electric Stand, Red Hot Chili Pepper, which I thought was particularly cool. I thought there was an excellent fight between him and Okuyasu, and then him and Josuke later on. But my favorite villain from Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, is, of course, none other than Yoshikage Kira. Yoshikage Kira is such a well-designed villain, not just from his motives of just wanting a peaceful life and wanting to be left alone, but also his stand. Killer Queen is so freaking cool. Like, anything it touches becomes a bomb. A part of its hand comes off and becomes another stand called Heart Attack. Then, later at the end of the series, it gets an ability where it goes back in time and makes fate change and reset, called Bites the Dust. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. Now, of course, as a villain, we don't necessarily root for the villain to win because their intentions are bad. But I just love the design of the character. I mean, heck, I got his tie. I would love to do a Yoshikage Kira cosplay as well. I'm not the Kosaku Kawajiri. I'm talking like Kira when we first see. So another thing about Yoshikage Kira that I like beside his design and stand is I like his character arc. I like how he tries to give up on committing murders, and he tries to live a peaceful life, but he just can't control that, like, animalistic urge that he has to murder other people. I know that sounds kind of messed up, but I like how we see the struggles. Like, for example, with Dio, we don't see any struggles with Dio. You know, all we know about Dio is that he's a jerk. He murdered Jonathan Joestar and took his body, and his stand is overpowered and stops time. But that's all we know. But with Kira, we know that he's been struggling with this all his life, you know, and he can't control the urges that he has. And I feel he's not necessarily a sympathetic character because he's certainly, like, evil, especially after he murders Shigechi. But I think, as far as, like, character traits go, he's certainly more relatable than Dio. Because, like I said, Dio was this all-powerful creature, and Kira was just a businessman trying to get by in his life. Now, having Yoshikage Kira being my favorite villain in JoJo's, I was excited to find out that there was actually a one-shot made by Hirohiko Araki that explains what happens to Kira after he gets his soul sucked out by that wall and after he gets killed by the ambulance. And it's called Dead Man's Questions. And believe it or not, I actually did read it. I thought it was a nice little one-shot. The ending of it is kind of ambiguous because it kind of just leaves Kira, like, wandering, you know, not knowing, like, how he died and what he's for. Like, he doesn't have Killer Queen or anything like that because, you know, like, that was part of, like, the physical world, and now he's a ghost. But what makes it so good is, like, you get to see him, and he's like, you just see more of a character that I was very fond of. Plus, I love, like, the bowler hat and, like, the design of his clothes. I think Hirohiko Araki has impeccable style with designing his characters. But anyway, so Dead Man's Question is about the ghost of Yoshikage Kira trying to find happiness and find meaning. But what happens is he ends up getting paid by a monk to commit murders and kill the living. And, you know, one of the opening lines of the one shot is him saying, yeah, I don't know what I did in my past life, but I know that I'm not going to go to heaven. And I just thought that was such an incredible look into his character. Like, he knew that he did horrible things and that he was a bad person, but he was still not ignorant, but he just didn't remember. And I think that internal struggle of him being like, yeah, I'm a bad dude, and I don't know where I'm from or where I'm going, but I'm not gonna get into heaven for what I've done. And when I first read it, I didn't really like the ambiguousness. Like, I kind of wanted Kira to pass on to the afterlife. But then after thinking about it, I realized that that's not a fitting ending for him. You know, when he goes into the alleyway and he gets his soul sucked back into that dark dimension or whatever, Raimi says to him, "Yeah, I don't know where that wall goes, but you're never gonna find peace." And I think that Dead Man's Questions is just such a perfect ending to Yoshikage Kira. Like, he just wanders the world for all eternity, which I think is in its own way a bit like hell. You know, like, he doesn't have a purpose. He doesn't have anyone but himself. He doesn't remember where he was from or how he died or even who he was except his name. And he's just got to experience eternity with that. You know, it's like cars getting blasted off into space and freezing, just being conscious, but being unable to die. Like, that is true hell. And I know that the Rohan OVA recently was released, given to all the people who bought the JoJo's Part 4 Blu-rays. And, you know, it's probably going to be up on a couple of streaming sites. So if I can get a copy of it, I'd really like to see it. But my hopes would be that if the Rohan OVA is successful, that they would end up doing Dead Man's Questions. I think with the hype that Part 4 has gotten and all of the following that it has as well, I think having Dead Man's Questions would be, I think that'd be absolutely phenomenal. And I really would love to see how that is animated. But that being said, this is my 2 cents. I've talked about my favorite JoJo's villains from across the parts. I mean, like I said, it's a bit harder for me to pick a favorite villains than it is to pick a favorite Joestar. Because of my knowledge, I know more villains than I do Joestars. You know, the Joestars I know 4. Villains I know like 40, right? But that being said, thank you so much for tuning in for part 2 of my JoJo series. Another part coming up soon. But I'm not going to spoil the surprise. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. And I will see you guys next time.